Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to listen to media cover-ups, lies, misinformation and anti-Australian propaganda. This is a very important issue for our democracy, because without freedom of speech, you really don't have any humanity itself. That is one of the major pillars of humanity itself, is freedom of speech, and that's something we don't have. We'll be getting some more information throughout the day on that from our great speakers. Our Constitution gives us that right to express and discuss political issues on all subjects, and that's in Section 7, 24 and 128 of the Australian Constitution. And that's why it's so important to call the media out for the lies that they've been telling us for donkey's years. So welcome, Rex Gilroy.
I'd like to thank Julie Head for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'd also like to thank my wife Heather for the preparation of this talk. Subject of my talk is the politicisation of Australia's prehistory. As an historical researcher for some years now, I've been appalled at the gradual erosion of our history by Marxist-inspired academics intent upon pushing a left-wing version, namely that our forefathers invaded this continent and stole it from its owners, the Aborigines, who are supposed to be the traditional owners, being the first Australians. Aided by the left-wing university element and the Marxist teachers in our schools, pushing white self-hatred propaganda laced with multicultural rubbish on our young people, the Aboriginal community at large is now pushing to make Australia a sovereign Aboriginal nation, seeking United Nations standover help in achieving their goals. And with the aid of sellout politicians, there is a move to criminalise any claim that the Aborigines were not the first Australians under the racial vilification laws. Thus, anyone who dares to disagree could be heavily fined and even jailed. And now we are faced with the current push to officially recognise Aboriginals as the first and only Stone Age inhabitants of Australia in our Constitution. This will be a grave error. This is clearly seen by Liberal Democrat Senator David Leonheim, who says there are anthropologists who have doubts about the Aborigines first Australians claim, and that it would be bizarre to put it into the Constitution. See the ABC website Thursday 25th of June for more details. Independent Senator Nick Xenophon, a strong supporter of the Aborigines first Australians claim, has attacked Senator Leonheim, stating any evidence to the contrary seems quite fanciful and, quite frankly, insulting. Aborigines, or Australoids, may have arrived here somewhere between 50,000 and 75,000 years ago, but to include them in our Constitution as the first Australians would be an incredible blunder, because it is only a matter of time before Australian scientists, with or without Aboriginal permission, unearth remains of pre-Aboriginal hominins themselves. When this happens, it is likely that the evidence, unless protected, will be buried, even perhaps destroyed. On these grounds, our Constitution must not be altered. Back in the 1980s, the then Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, gave Aborigines the right to seize Australoid remains from government museums and universities throughout Australia and worldwide for reburial. When this happened, Professor D. J. Mulvaney, Professor of Anthropology at Sydney University, begged Hawke not to permit this action, warning him that, quote, if you allow this to happen, Australia will become the laughingstock of the scientific world. We will become known as the only nation on earth reburying its past. And that is exactly what has happened. Now that archaeological fieldwork is virtually non-existent, having been largely forbidden by standover Aboriginal Marxists. Scientists and students alike have been prevented from examining fossil remains, anthropological research has virtually ceased, and classes on this subject closed for lack of students. Similarly, any scientist who openly dares to object is declared racist. And this extends to that noted, infamous historical researcher Rex Gilroy, OWB, who is on a university blacklist, which means I am not to be given any assistance or support for my pre-Aboriginal researchers. And my fossil and stone artefacts collection have been accordingly condemned as highly racist propaganda, denying our Aboriginal people their land rights. Some time ago, Professor D.J. Mulvaney, seen here, was attacked for stating that, quote, every time some relic is unearthed, it is immediately declared to be Aboriginal, but what if it isn't? I am not exaggerating when I say that my wife Heather and I are the only field researchers involved in the gathering of fossil and artefact evidence demonstrating that Australia has an old Stone Age past. Our evidence, published both in our books and on the internet, has led some left-wing Aboriginal supporting scientists to suggest to politicians, both Labor and Liberal, that laws should be passed under the Racial Vilification Act to prevent such material from being seen by the community at large. This law, they suggest, should also extend to books, magazine and newspaper articles, or TV documentaries and radio interviews presenting this evidence, as well as lectures. And then there are those scientists concerned that the evidence uncovered by the Gilroys, which while showing that Australia has a pre-Aboriginal Stone Age past, also threatens the out of Africa dogma, which now has more holes in it than the Titanic. Let us now examine some of this forbidden evidence that would place Australia at the forefront of world prehistory research. On Friday the 17th of February 2015, while walking my dog on a North Katoomba fire trail, I chanced to pick up a small ironstone fragment to discover that on one side it contained the left profile impression of a mineralised, mummified, rat-sized creature with broad head and an open mouth twisted to the right. There is a right eye socket. There are left front and back limbs minus their five-toed feet. There is a curved tail. Some spinal ridges missing. The little creature is 13.5 centimetres long and has been identified as a cynodont, a mammalian reptile species that scientists suggest may have grown hair. The fossil dates to Triassic times, 208 to 245 million years ago. It was the cynodonts which gave rise to the later mammals, primates and ourselves. Cynodont fossils occur from Africa to Europe, Asia and America. This fossil is the first evidence of the presence of this species in Australia. This species would have reached Australia from Africa via Antarctica before the breaking up of the supercontinents Laurasia and Gondwana land during the Paleozoic era, some 600 to 270 million years ago. The presence of the cynodont opens the door to a separate hominin evolution in Australia to that of Africa. Next. This is supported by primate hand and feet fossils recently uncovered in Miocene slate deposits near Nunes, dating back 17 million years ago. Like the hand of a gibbon, the thumb is positioned further back than in modern human hands, and the fingers are longer than those of a modern human, as seen here in a gibbon hand. Next. In a gibbon hand, The thumb is positioned further back than in a modern human hand. As seen here in the gibbon hand, designed for an arboreal existence. I had to chalk outline these specimens due to their faded condition. Next, the feet fossils display shorter toes than other fossil arboreal primates. This is significant. Paleontologists claim our supposed African primate ancestors left the trees to forage on the ground upon two legs 6.5 million years ago. Yet here in Australia is evidence of this momentous event in human evolution having occurred 17 million years ago. Next. Between June 2005 and March 2006, the Gilroys unearthed these three endocasts of the primitive form of human ancestor displaying vague Australopithecine features. Next. From mud and ash deposits of a nearby volcanic plug near Bega on the New South Wales far south coast. I soon learnt that Australian National University volcanologists had already dated this and several other volcanic plugs and their ash deposits in the Bega district to around 7 million years BP, before present. When I announced my 7 million years old skull finds in the Bega newspaper, there was a wave of academic hostility and cries of racism, followed by the suppression of my discovery in the media. Also, the ABC gave a noted university paleontologist a half-hour nationwide live interview in which he repeatedly discredited me for my lack of university degrees, and he also lied, stating that the volcanic sites were, quote, only a few thousand years old. Also, an ABC reporter declared that my finds were racist because they questioned the right of the Aborigines to be the first Australians. The Bega fossils are now seen by us as a form of hominin leading to Australopithecines. Next. It now seems certain that in early Miocene times, about 8 million years ago, bands of creatures ancestral to the Australopithecines wandered out of Africa to reach Asia and eventually cross over a former land shelf that linked Australia to mainland Asia, evolving into both robust and gracile forms of Australopithecines here, either before or about the same time as they did in Africa. On Monday, 10th of August 2009, Heather and I recovered this deteriorated internal endocast hominin skull of basaltic mineralisation from Pliocene deposits dating back 4 to 6 million years BP at a Barnard River site near Wingham on the New South Wales mid-north coast. Despite its bad condition, having reconstructed the specimen, we find that we believe it may represent a transitional ancestral stage between the Bega skull endocasts and early robust Australopithecine forms, and is now named Australopithecus winghami Gilroy. Here is an Australopithecine Boise skull at the top here. It dates, yeah, you can see, where's this work? Yeah, that's it there. You can see the similarity. So this is an Australopithecine Boise skull from Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, East Africa for comparison. It dates 1,750,000 years BP, although Australopithecus wing MI is an endocast and allowing for distortions caused in the mineralisation process. It displays a flat cranium with no forehead and thick brow ridges with large eye sockets at the top of the skull, as in the African robust Australopithecine skulls. This means that the brain was situated behind the eyes. As we evolved into anatomically modern humans, our forehead evolved and the brain moved upwards to its present position. Here is the type specimen, next. Here is the type specimen of what I have named Australopithecus australis, recovered from a 2.5 million year old late Pliocene deposit outside Katoomba on Narranac Plateau, actually, on Thursday the 6th of January 2005. And for comparison, the next is a skull of Australopithecus robustus of South Africa, who lived 2 million years to 1.2 million years ago. I have unearthed several mineralised skull types and endocasts of both robust and gracile Australopithecine forms at sites in New South Wales, Central Australia and Tasmania, dating to 2-3 million years BP. Next. These fossil feet impressions, heading from north to south, were made by an Australopithecine in cooled volcanic ash following an eruption in Canangara National Park 3 million years ago. The presence of Australopithecines in Australia alone makes our Aborigines pale into insignificance by comparison. Next. Here is an artist's reconstruction of Australopithecines, both the thick-set robust and the slender gracile forms. Australopithecus australis was of course a robust form. Both forms were herbivorous and in dietary habits and were not tool makers. Our fossils, beginning with the Australopithecus australis, are the first fossil remains of these hominins found beyond Africa. Yet they go ignored by our scientists, not only because they challenge the dying out of Africa dogma, but because they are seen as a threat to the mythology that our Aborigines are the first Australians. Next. Many scientists suspect the genus Homo evolved from a gracile Australopithecine form. Here is a deteriorated internal endocast of a gracile Australopithecine similar to some African examples found on the Cox's River on New Year's Day 2008 by myself in Dawn Pleistocene deposit some 2 million years old. Note the faint tooth outline or teeth outlines of the upper and lower jaws has been since closely studied, and I've come to the conclusion that it's a gracile, and we've called it Australopithecus coxi. And below is the skull of a female, Australopithecus africanus, a gracile species that roamed South Africa at the same time. Next, primitive dawn tools, or eoliths, found in late Pliocene deposits, some 2.5 million years old, by the Gilroys at New England. Next, Blue Mountains and other sites. Next, suggest an early unknown Homo race shared Australia. Shared Australia alongside the Australopithecines at that time. These tools could predate African examples, particularly this one. Naturally, the Gilroys' finds have been ignored by university desk professors. Next. However, Dr. Michael Archer thinks differently. Although we have shown that hominins have been in Australia for far longer than Dr. Archer's 1 million years, his support for a pre-Aboriginal hominin presence is a welcome change. Currently, there is a move using DNA or DNA evidence, so-called, to prove the Aborigines did not arrive here from Southeast Asia, but evolved here from obscure Homo ancestors up to 50,000 years ago. No local fossil evidence supports this claim. Also, on the basis, next, of crude bark shelters and grass huts, we are now told we have to believe that the Aborigines invented architecture 8,000 years ago or more. Similar stonework in Victoria, as well as here on the Blue Mountains. Next, come on now. Sorry about this. Similar stonework in Victoria, as well as here on the Blue Mountains, Central West and New England district, of a more advanced, unknown megalithic culture has been declared Aboriginal, regardless of there being no real evidence to prove this claim. Since when were they megalith builders? Aborigines were never stonemasons. Next. We may also dismiss claims that Aborigines invented agriculture. On a lighter note, in the March-April, a lighter note, in the March-April 2011 issue of New Dawn magazine, there is an article by one Stephen Strong called "The First Race Out of Australia, Not Africa," in which he makes the following ridiculous claims. I quote, "After extensive consultation and research, we are of the opinion that at some time in the distant past, no less than 50,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier, Aboriginal men and women set sail from Australia and began exploring foreign lands. They were the bearers of new insights and options, and bequeathed humanity the cornerstones of civilization, religion, culture, gender equality, art, sailing, democracy, astronomy, surgery, and their genes. This nonsense is typical of the Marxist-inspired New Age gone mad, and yet there are simple-minded people who believe it. Evidence of far earlier Homo, even predating Homo erectus, has to be dismissed in order to prop up the nobody before the Aborigines dogma. The latest evidence of this kind is this deteriorated ironstone mineralised skull unearthed by myself at the same fossil-bearing area in North Katoomba as the cynodont described at the beginning of this talk. The specimen, despite some distortion, and missing the mandibular processes of the lower jaw, was recovered on Saturday 10th of October 2015 in late Pliocene deposits 3 million years old. Like archaic, robust Australopithecine forms, this skull has no forehead, meaning the brain was situated behind the eyes. The nasal area has been flattened during the mineralisation process, and like robust Australopithecine skulls, the face projects forward. Close up of the teeth. However, this skull looks more gracile in appearance, and its open jaws reveals the small teeth of a primitive Homo, which means the hominin was a meat eater rather than a vegetarian Australopithecine living on nuts, berries and plant roots, as typical of their larger teeth. Here is a primitive dawn ancestral race, ancestral to the genus Homo, who had evolved from a gracile Australopithecine form here in Australia, not Africa, 3 million years ago, and had yet to lose its remnant Australopithecine racial features. I've named the skull Homo unas Gilroy, that's Latin for first Homo. Back in 1995, Richard Fulligar of the Australian Museum, Sydney, and Leslie Head and David Price of the School of Geoscience at the University of Wollongong excavated a sandstone rock shelter at Jinmian in the Northern Territory to discover a stone tool culture between 116,000 and 174,000 years old. The tools appeared to be those of a late Homo erectus form. They also discovered cupule markings, which you might see at the back here. The cupule markings on the rock shelter wall around the same age, making him among the earliest known Stone Age rock art in the world. This did not go down well with the Aboriginal political community and their left-wing university allies. The datings and the technology used to determine them was subsequently claimed to have been in error. The age of the Jinmian finds were redated to around 22,000 years BP, which was well within the age of Aboriginal culture, as one desk professor stated. Subsequently, the scientists responsible for the discovery had to apologise to the Aboriginal community for the hurt they had caused. Next. Despite efforts to silence the Gilroy's discoveries over the years, the following evidence finally buries the out of Africa and Australian and Aborigines, the first Australians, politically correct dogma. In May 1972, my late father, Mr. W.F. Bill Gilroy, recovered this limestone mineralised skull endocast of an archaic Homo sapien from Pleistocene gravel deposits on the Fish River at Taranah. The fossil was thought to date back 350,000 years BP, before present. Then in April 1973, on a return visit to this site with my father, from the same stratified deposits as the first skull, but 33.3 metres distant, I recovered this smaller limestone endocast of a form of Homo erectus. The evidence suggested that populations of Homo erectus were sharing the countryside with groups of their offshoot archaic Homo sapiens as late as 350,000 years ago. However, it has now been established by new geological datings that both fossils actually date around 850,000 years BP. Here is an incomplete Homo erectus skull endocast from Germany, structurally similar to the Taranah Homo erectus specimen dating 700,000 years. In Africa, Homo sapiens first appeared a mere 195,000 years ago by our present knowledge. Thus Australia, not Africa, is the birthplace of modern humans. The evidence clearly shows that the Australoids were mere latecomers to this continent. Next. A Homo erectus family cooking a meal over a fire, or cooking meat rather. It was members of the genus Homo who first discovered how to make fire by friction in Africa around 2,500,000 years ago. It is likely that Homo erectus, or perhaps an earlier Homo form, developed fire making in Australia about this time. On Wednesday the 4th of June 1997, I removed this incomplete fossil archaic Homo erectus skull from 1.5 million year old Pleistocene deposits at a Mudgee district location. The cranial bones are gone, exposing the mineralised soil filling of the skull's interior. Unlike the late Homo erectus high sloping forehead, the archaic skulls had little or no forehead and were flat, meaning that the brain was located behind the eyes, which had thick projecting brow ridges. As the cranium evolved, the brain moved up to its present position, as I said earlier, as seen in this cast of the late Homo erectus skull. Here are down and rear views. Next. Here are down and rear views of the Mudgee skull and Homo erectus cast. Like the Australopithecines, Homo erectus skulls were dolichocephalic, that is, long and narrow, with forward projecting faces, whereas Homo sapiens skulls are brachiocephalic or rounded, with basically vertical faces. On all the foregoing evidence, we can free ourselves of the "we was robbed of our sacred land" nonsense and stolen generation white self-hatred, anti-European culture propaganda of Marxist academics. Yet secret moves are afoot in Canberra that could in future see any evidence of a pre-Aboriginal hominin Australia buried and its racist defenders turned into criminals. Make no mistake, friends, free speech and expression is under attack in Australia as never before. White Australians' opposition to the multiracial mongralisation of our traditional European culture is rapidly becoming criminalised by our race traitor politicians of both major parties. The Marxist-inspired Aboriginal flag must now be flown alongside the Australian flag on all government buildings, city councils, buildings, school grounds, etc. We are now a divided nation whose political leaders seem helpless to prevent the burning of our flag by Aboriginal demonstrators or the desecration of historical monuments by these people who see them as symbols of British colonialism and domination. They choose to forget all the benefits they enjoy because of our culture. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found my talk interesting, and are there any questions?
I think we're going to be leading them until the end of the session.
Right.
Most of you are familiar with Amy's works. I mean, she's written books galore, absolutely prolific, especially in the area of uncovering voter fraud. That's her special area. And this is over, as we can gather, Amy's been around for a long time, and especially with her husband Frank's involvement in the legal profession, has seen it firsthand, the treachery to do with rorting elections. So please welcome Dr. Amy McGrath.
Let me see, the subject I have is the one subject that nobody's been looking at. I thought that as we've been all going to a lot of abstract language for years, doing electoral fraud for 20 years, you finish up with a lot of tri-syllable words and a lot of abstract arguments, and you have to spend time explaining what the argument is before you get into it. I decided I had to look at the one subject that nobody's been looking at. But I was looking for you able to do what you've done with parables for centuries, put a person in it. And I got it a few weeks ago when Shorten made a terrible mistake. Shorten told the Australian newspaper that he was going to get 900,000 votes next election from GETUP. Now, I think he was mad to say that. I've now found somebody else who read it, so I'm quite sure it was there. 900,000. So I say, I had to tackle GETUP. This is dreadful. If he's got 900,000 votes next election, he's going to win it. And he's got the mechanism to do it. So this is crisis time, and nobody's looking at GETUP because they don't understand it. And in order to understand it, you have to understand that there's not one kind of communism. There are three kinds of communism at least. And once you understand that, you're on your way. Now, I got a second clue some years back, in recent years. I happened to be in London when the shops went on fire. And again, I'm talking in parables. The shops went on fire, but it wasn't like the communist actions. And I was near Kingston Thames. I was in Kingston Thames. And they started barricading Kingston Thames. And I'd been in London about 30 years before when there was another barricade episode. And it didn't look right. And then they suddenly had 11 suburbs attacked and then some groups in the country. And I realised that this was actually an anarchist act. So I typed into the computer anarchist communism, and I got it. The anarchists and communists joined up with a pact in 1975 in Paris, a treaty, that they would work together. Now, to understand the GETUP, it is anarchist. That's what puzzles everybody. It's an anarchist action. Now, none of you are old enough to go back to the Spanish Civil War. In fact, I did, because you're not going to believe I'm still standing talking, but I was 12 when my father was listening to Hitler with his first speeches in 1933. Can you understand that? And I'm still talking. I must say the numbers who are in my age group are falling at this stage. And so this meant that you had an anarchist communist situation, which was the same as the Spanish Civil War. Now, you wouldn't know about the Spanish Civil War, most of the younger ones, because you're not taught history anymore. Now, when I went to school before World War II, because I finished the university in 1941, because you could leave school at 16. I'm sure lots of you would love to leave school at 16, but the boys left at 15, in fact, in those days.
14.
What?
14, we were allowed to leave school.
What?
14.
14, that's right. And that's what they should do if they want to do trades. They shouldn't be stuck at school anymore. And so here you had a threatening situation to civilization. In 1941, my husband was called back out of the army to finish his degree, and that's how I met him, and that's how he got involved fighting communists for the next 10 years. That's another story. It's been written up in one of my books. So you have here a situation of crisis where Shorten has said he's going to win an election. Now this is just 10 years, and that's all since GETUP was formed. 10 years, they've gone from nothing, they've gone to threatening 900,000 votes. And who's looking at it? There's not a word in any of the papers or magazines or anywhere else. All the highfalutin intellectual magazines that go on too long about abstract subjects, I mean, not even looked at it. It's very alarming. So you have to look at the situation, how these situations happened. GETUP, first the word, you have to know what the word means. The word means, GETUP means, it's the word that, I have to take back to the history of it. It goes back to the French Revolution. The first song, it's a song, beginning of the words of a song, which was written to the tune of the Marseillaise in 1888 by a Frenchman, and the words were, get up, arise you workers, out of your terrible disaster. I've left the words at home, of course. Out of your terrible,
slumbers, arise you prisoners
get
of
up,
want. For reason in revolt now slumbers, and last begins the rights of man.
Right.
The International.
The International. And it became the words of, it was a tune of the Marseillaise of French Revolution. That's where it began. Now that was the national anthem of Lenin's Russia until 1949. It's still one of their anthems, and it means what it says: get up and arise and destroy the world as it is today, was the theme of it. And that is what is this, why it's called Get Up. It's a threat to destroy the world as we know it. But who knows it? I didn't, until I went into it. We should all be very alarmed. Now, how did it get formed? Who formed it? It was only 10 years ago, 2005, that it was formed. It was formed by Evan Thornley, who was secretary of the Fabian Society. Now, I should mention there's no such thing as Fabian. Edwardson Shaw created the Fabian Society, not because it was different from Marx, but because they said Marx was wrong, the lower classes would never rise. They only want to improve themselves. It's the middle class who wanted to, who would destroy each other. And that's going up in the North Shore at the moment. the middle class are destroying each other because of what GETUP's been doing and the trouble they've been causing. And they're creating the atmosphere, and it's possible to see 4 prime ministers chaos, 4 prime ministers in succession. That's what was being deliberately developed, the public becoming used to chaos. Now, what happened then with the GETUP? It was curious to analyse because it involved, I realised, it coming from 2 directions. It was coming from the bankers, David Rockefeller, and the Trilateral Commission in one direction, and it was coming from George Soros in another, using women's movement, the heiress to the IB fortune, and money from that direction. So George Soros, it's not the time to explain at length who George Soros was, but he was, according to, he has destroyed 14 countries. We are the 4th he's busy destroying. And he was called Dracula by Thailand, who were one of the first of the victims of Soros destroying the finances of the country. Now, who founded GETUP? Evan Shortley. Evan Shortley. And he formed it. He already was a millionaire with about $50 million. He was in Melbourne. He was secretary of the Fabian Society, which I said there's no such thing as communist society. All the leaders, including Hawke and the whole bleeding lot of them, belonged to the Fabian Society, right through one of the leaders, every one of them. And they were on the list. He founded the Forum. Soros said $1.5 million. Money came seeming a few within a year, over $1 million. Another $3 million came from unions not long after, 6 unions involved. Thornley, then Bill Shorten was the foundation member. Bill Shorten had taken money in the $1 million scandal that you've seen about the AWU, and he was there when Rob Kernahan was beaten up for the fact he was going to the press to say what had happened to that $1 million. Shorten was the AWU. There was Combet, who tends to be left out of it. Combet's just retired from the head of the, I think from the Labour Party, National Office of the Labour Party, or he may still be there. And Combet, his name's been left out because he was the disaster of the cavalcade advance on Parliament House in 1994 when they bashed down the doors of the Parliament, and that was done with the CMFU. Then there are the others you need to know. We were onto the communists and the anarchists. The anarchists was Kate Farmhen, I think, Farm, who was in charge of wildlife. And you do have to know the wildlife body was taken over, which was created by the princes, 3 princes of the royalty of Europe, was taken over by the development, I think it's called RLI or something, in America, who wanted to create climate change as a completely false concept to deceive everybody that they had to bring in a one world government. Now the difference in communism about one world government is the Trotskyites wanted one world government and the communists or Leninists wanted to capture the governments of different countries, which they were doing in the 1975 and so on. Now, that means Combet was part of this for 2 years till he got an opportunity to go into Parliament. And his purpose of it was, GETUP, was to do exactly what the song says, to destroy our existing society. Now, if they went around saying that, you wouldn't be here talking. But you're here because you're concerned, your sense of something is dreadfully wrong, in my opinion, and you don't know what it is. Well, it's GETUP. In 10 years, GETUP has gone to the situation for no members, where it says, Shorten says he could have 900,000 votes. So where is he getting them from? Now, I don't go into all my knowledge of electoral fraud, where it happens, how it happens, or that the audit office once found 500,000 names they couldn't account from where they came from on the existing electoral rolls. You know, it's as bad as that. They can use empty names, but nobody's looking at voting papers, ballot papers, and where they printed, and how they printed, and how many of them printed, and where they kept. Well, I voted in the New South Wales election in a shed. I went to vote illegally, because you still have to have a reason in Rockdale, in New South Wales elections. They were in a shed, all the papers were there in the overnights, nobody was sleeping there. Anybody could have got a barrel of ballot papers. And I even found they're probably going to print them in China. Now, we can go back to the fact and supporting GETUP and all their votes and where they come from, their lists. You can imagine, and you can imagine it's so easy to steal them, because they're to print them, because that dreadful Graham Richardson actually owned a body printing them, and the Murdoch Press printed 48% of them in another election. They used to have government printers totally patrolled, only ones that printed them. And who changed that in New South Wales? Carr. So we have this problem that GETUP's gone for 10 years. Evan Thornley, himself, funnily enough, got into Parliament, got off the board, went to the Parliament for 2 or 3 years, and then went to the Middle East and became a Jew. That was a very interesting thing to have. He disappeared. What do we do about this in 10 years? I don't know. You have to start with getting out, getting the word out, which I will do, hopefully, thanks to you being here. I don't know whether they're recording it today or whether I'll have to... they are. Where? It's right down here. It's too small. I mean, that can't film me. That's only the voice. Good God, and I'm wagging my head and everything.
You're going to go on YouTube.
The wagging's going to go on there. Right, never mind. I would have done it differently slightly. It's what I find is extraordinary. In the Chapman Society, for 20 years or more, and writing those books, the Chapman Society have got old, the people who were looking at that. And the 5 people in the Parliament who grew up to high positions, Turnbull's tossed them all out, the people who were on electoral fraud, from the ministry. I think that word of mouth is extraordinary. When I put the first Wolf book out, I thought nobody's going to read it. I said to Alan Jones, I haven't had much to do with him directly, but over the years I think he launched one of the books and so on. He puts it on at night. And suddenly, it was in, 700 Facebooks in 48 hours. I couldn't believe it. I'm very out of touch with what all this could do. But it was in such a short time. So this means that I suddenly found a younger generation, the ones who are listening to radio, people whose jobs change every day, who are at risk, the small businessmen, the drivers of trucks, all these wonderful people listening to radio. They're not reading the Australian. And they're putting 2 and 2 together. The farmers, 100 farmers have shot themselves because Carr agreed to shutting down part of their properties. There are a lot of alarms going on throughout the country and through people going around in their trucks, talking to other people listening to the radio, for a huge conservative reaction I see going on. And I thought the most wonderful thing that would happen, and everybody would see, that all those migrants have gone to Germany, and the whole of this one world pattern that was being created depended on the one European state. It depended on that in relation to America, which had been taken over by the Federal Reserve banks, all of them German bankers. And so both the trusts were from Germany for this change. Now, I do have to bring into the equation the fact people don't know that America nearly became German. There were so many migrants in early days from Germany through Holland, which speaks German practically, and the bankers are often have their main bank in Holland. They, what happened is that these bankers, the Americans nearly became German and speaking German. English as the language for America only won by one vote. Now, at this time, people need to know 58 million German descent is still in America. It makes it easier to understand what's going on. But I see hope. I hope in you people here today. Enormous hope, because I understand from others that there are a number of groups across Sydney. I've just had a message from Melbourne, one of the leading commentators on the internet, that she wants me to talk to two more. It was Maria Rigoni in Melbourne we brought up to Sydney, who had actually taken action against the pre-poll voting for the Senate of Victoria, the upper house, took legal action because they break it up to acting each for an electorate in the upper house. She took a legal action and was encouraged in future to take further action over the whole state if it happened again in the election of Victoria. I leave with the thought that we have to publicise the fact that the GETUP exists to raise the numbers, raise confusion, which is the hallmark, and to raise the vote for Greens, which is run by a small group of anarchists, and I'll tell you who they are. The one was Kate Fairmont, who worked with wildlife, been taken over, I told you. The other is Amanda Tattersall, who's acquired her experience as a member of the group of the Fabian Society, who created GETUP. She went to America and consulted Alinsky. Now, Alinsky was the communist who taught Obama and got him into the federal presidency. She went and consulted him in a special course that he ran, and he was what they call a weatherman. I know about them because my cousin's husband thought weathermen would be a good idea here, and the weathermen did 17 violent actions in America. That particular cousin's husband happened to be a communist. The word communist should be used, that's my final word, on all these activities of Greens, GETUP, and stop calling them lefts. They never have been anything but violent communists who want to change it into a total state of destruction of our democracy. Thank you.
Also mention the connection with the Bilderberg Group.
Bilderberg. The Rockefeller Group, a trilateral commission you want to know about?
Well, how these groups, and Soros,
yes,
how they're connected with the Bilderberg Group.
Well, yes, look, I'm glad you've done that. I did leave one man out, John Hewson. John Hewson is the trilateral commission member on the... that's very interesting because he was there as a member when it was formed. He left it within a month, but what he did was, I think they gave extra money that's never been recorded from the Trilateral Commission, because David Rockefeller is a publicly confessed communist, and he runs the Lateral Commission as a completely rogue organisation in America. I don't know why John Hewson meant that there was a double-fanged support. There was Soros in his world, and there was the Trilateral Commission, which practically selects all the presidents. And they do that at an annual occasion over in California, where they sort of worship an owl. It goes back to ancient Holy Roman Empire, where in Czechoslovakia, they actually were centre for the Holy Roman Empire. But that gets into sidetracking, and I'm not sure in talking in such a meeting whether it doesn't go to sidetracks too much, and I left him out over that. But it is a cause, I think, of funding. And another thing it could add, Soros, I'm not sure who funded a woman who came from Move On. She had run Move On, which was the same as GETUP, as a trial before they did it in Australia, because Australia's the biggest prize. He who controls us controls the Pacific. And this factor that they came in to the picture, I think really meant that they sent a lot of funding. There was a lot of money coming in very quickly over the 10 years to finance, for instance, 700 TV ads in 2010. That's a hell of a lot of money. So much so that the press, now this is interesting, the press revolted and wouldn't take any more in 2013. So there are a lot of things going on. I think that John Hewson and Ross Garnaut are both in that category of working for outside authorities. Then they paid for the woman to come in and run, an American, to come in and run, as she had done in the trial Move On in America, the GETUP in the 2010 election for Gilroy. It's pretty awful.